Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Great. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome today Dr. Luc Djoussé, who's a cardiovascular epidemiologist. This is, I think, an exciting addition to our speaker series this semester. We haven't had someone talking about this aspect of nutrition. So we're really excited about this. Dr. Djoussé has studied both in the University of Saarland in Germany and also in Boston University here in Boston. He's an associate professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School and also an associate professor of nutrition at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. And he serves as director of research in the Division of Aging and Department of Medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital and is the chief epidemiologist and director of science at Maverick, of Boston Veterans Affairs. And so today we're going to hear about the Million Veteran Program. And Dr. Djoussé leads the nutrition group within the Million Veteran Program. So many of you might be familiar with this. Some of you, including me, this might all be very new. So we are excited to learn a bit more about Million Veteran Program and how it has enabled exciting nutrition research. Dr. Djoussé's research itself focuses on the role of dietary factors and other modifiable lifestyle factors on the risk of cardiovascular disease. So without further ado, let me turn it over to you, Dr. Djoussé, and we look forward to hearing your talk. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be back and give you an overview of the Million Veteran Program and share some of the current finding up to date pertaining to nutritional aspects on cardiovascular disease risk. So here are my disclosures. So when I was first contacted to give a talk about MVP data, I was a little bit nervous because I was afraid it was going to be very dry without a hypothesis, some relation that could make sense. But I was reassured that I have the latitude to build in some example of what we've done as a project. So my talk today is going to be as follows. I'm going to provide the rationale for studying cardiovascular disease among U.S. veterans and provide some detail about the MVP start, recruitment, enrollment, current status, and then followed by dietary assessment among veterans in MVP and show you some selected findings on dietary habits and the risk of cardiovascular disease and conclude with major findings and future directions. So why focus on cardiovascular disease among veterans? So CVD is one of the major causes of death and disability among veterans and non-veterans, despite progress in medical and surgical management of CVD. Therefore, it is important to improve tools and strategy for the primary as well as secondary prevention of CVD to lower the cost and burden of CVD. So currently, there are about 1.5 million veterans with CVD as of 2020. That's about a quarter of the veteran. And per year, there are about 4 per 1,000 person year new onset CVD among veterans. And when it comes to stroke, the number is about the same, close to the same. So 5 per 1,000 person years. So quite prevalent. So among the current primary prevention tools, statins introduced in the 80s as a drug that can powerfully reduce the bad cholesterol and cut down the rate of cardiovascular disease. So, however, statin use among veterans is only about 70% in those with already cardiovascular disease diagnosis. So very little is known about dietary patterns of U.S. veterans across the U.S. and the association with chronic diseases. So back in time, so this is the curve depicting death per thousand and from cardiovascular disease in the US. So you can see almost exponential increase in death rate from the 20th century and the peak in the late 60s. And after that, with decline. And I'm showing the slides to show that the decline wasn't primarily due to drug, to PCI, and CABG, other top-notch intervention that a cardiologist could do. But you can recall the Framingham study in 1942, and then the major finding, the five main risk factor were published in the 70, the, the early 60s, 62. So, and where smoking, physical activity, obesity, cholesterol, high blood pressure were the major risk factor, familial history, and way before the statin in the 80s, as you can see the decline, suggesting that the decline wasn't necessarily attributable to the beta blocker, other potential drug to treat cardiovascular disease or surgery. So, but the lifestyle change through the warning of public health officials, Surgeon General, and so forth. So there's a role of modifiable risk factor. This slide is dense, but again, I don't want to spend time here. But suffice to say, the physician health study showed that aspirin could be useful for the primary prevention in the 80s. The other thrombolytical drugs were discovered later in the early 90s. So the 2000 get with the guidelines were launched. The PCSK9 for the better treatment for familial hyperlipidemia or other cases where the statin and other intervention cannot lower the bad cholesterol to satisfaction. So here we take a snapshot of what the veteran doing with statin over time. Here from 2003 to 2020, you can see that the statin use among veterans with cardiovascular disease went up with a peak in the 2008, about 78%, but it went down. And then in the early 2020s, it's starting to creep up a little bit. But this is saying you have a potential effective drug out there on the market, and the veterans don't need to pay because they're covered by the VA system. And yet, you have less than 70% using this potential drug, even though they have been diagnosed with cardiovascular disease. It is a little bit better for men than it is for women on the right here, but the same pattern. So women's about 68 peak and currently around 64, whereby men currently in the low 70s. So by race, whites are doing a little bit better than blacks. So these are veterans with CVD treated to goal, meaning the bad cholesterol is below 70 milligram per deciliter. So, and you can see that although there's some improvement in white from 15% in early 2000 to almost 45% in 2020. So among black, about 10% 2003 to only 30% in 2020. So there's a lot of room to go to for improvement, and additional tool in the armamentarium for the healthcare provider to lower the cholesterol. As we know, the LDL cholesterol and outcome, there's a linear relation. So the lower it goes, the fewer outcome you're going to encounter. Here again, snapshot of the prevalence of Life Simple 7 among veterans. So where the green is where we want to focus being ideal, BMI 20%, not smoking 27%, physical activity about 4%, Total cholesterol 20%, blood pressure 18%, glucose 35%, and diet, we can't see green at all, not being ideal on the diet, 0.4%. And this mirror what's happening in the general US population, if not worse, where the ideal on diet is very low. So I'm going to transition to overview of the Million Veteran Program, abbreviated MVP. So the Million Veteran Program is a prospective mega cohort started in 2009 within the Veterans Health Administration to study genetic and non-genetic determinant of chronic diseases among US veterans. So the program collects data on health, lifestyle. Every veteran provide blood sample, and biospecimen are stored for genetic analysis uh, and other assay. And there's a state-of-the-art lab at JP facility. That's where all the bloods are stored. And we leverage electronic health records collected for many decades among veterans. And also we have the ability to recontact veteran enrolled in the program. So the enrollment started strategy with invitational mailing, where snail mail were sent to the veteran with baseline survey, along with the MVP brochure describing what the study is about, the goals, the objective. And those that responded received informed consent in the mail, where they had to sign and send it back. And the study procedure were detailed with the informed consent, HIPAA, and blood collection explanation and guidelines. So here's the VA network across the US. So the Veteran Health Administration Network is huge, covering the entire US, including Alaska and Hawaii. So the dark blue are the VA Medical Center with the high density in Midwest, Northeast, Southeast, but also West Coast as well. And there are other primary care center, the community-based outpatient center called CBOX, and other facility that I'm going to detail here. For point of care, there are 21 integrated healthcare networks, 152 major medical centers, almost 1,000 outpatient clinics, 370 veteran center, 202 domiciliary, and 134 community living centers. So these are places where we can access veteran. And the VA patient population, there are about 9 million enrolled in the VA healthcare system, about 6 million active patient, 22 million all-time patient. So in 2015, there were about 84 million outpatient visits and about 700,000 inpatient admission for that fiscal year 2015. So here's the US map with the recruitment side for MVP, and it mirrors the point of care that I show you. And the coordinating center for MVP is in Boston. And again, 2009, the planning piloting phase started, 2010, IRB approval, and officially launched in 2011. So the recruitment was about 100K per year until COVID hit, and a delay achieving the goal. But on November 8, 2023, we hit the target goal of 1 million enrolled in the study. And as of today, there are about 1,050,000 enrolled. And it's keep going because the VA decided to um, add additional priority, like enhance women and minority recruitment. As you will see in some of the data, the majority of the veteran are white and are male. So I'm going to transition here into dietary assessment in MVP. We did not use a fancy tool because we're talking so many million, and it's time consuming to have a detailed food frequency questionnaire. We use an abbreviated 61 item food frequency questionnaire from Walt Willett, and it contains 8 dairy products, 20 fruits and fruits and beverage items, 21 meat, sweets, and bread, and 12 other items. And we asked veteran to complete the food frequency questionnaire. And so, as you know, it's an extra burden on them. And roughly about a third of them completed the food frequency questionnaire. And we had pre-specify answer, the category. We also query about the method of preparation of meal, whether they're on a special diet or whether they've changed their diet recently. So we clean the raw questionnaire and prepare it so that the Channing lab under Dr. Willett's supervision could output nutrient using the Harvard food composition database supplemented by manufacturer um, uh, data. So we have 322 individual nutrient and 21 dietary supplement in nearly 400,000 participants. So because of the cost to generate the nutrient in so many people, we decided to do by phase. The first phase output nutrient for nearly 400,000, and we're currently preparing the next batch of at least 100,000 more food frequency questionnaire to add on to the nutrient database. So we use the residual method to adjust for nutrient. And I'm going to turn to the actual science because we have to validate, can we get the same answer with 61 item among veteran as with the Framingham, the ERIC, the UK Biobank, and other major study out there. So that was our goal to test. I'm going to show you one of my favorite example in my alley, alcohol consumption and the risk of heart failure among veterans. So why focus on heart failure among veterans? Each adult veteran has about 20% chance of developing heart failure during their lifetime, and so is the general population. These Framingham report. So heart failure is one of the leading causes of office visit among older adults, and the mortality is high. 1 year mortality is about 20%, and at 5 years, it's about 41% in men and 55% in women. So we previously shown that modifiable lifestyle factor can reduce the risk of heart failure. However, we have no data on the relation of moderate drinking and heart failure and its subtype with preserved left ventricular function or um, uh, poor left ventricular function among veterans. It is also unclear whether the type of beverage consumed matters, such as a difference between beer consumption, wine consumption, liquor consumption. So the primary objective was to evaluate the association of total alcohol intake with the incidence of total heart failure. And the secondary questions were to examine the subtype of heart failure and assess whether there's a difference across beverage type. Uh, we use the baseline survey to assess alcohol consumption. The frequency and the volume was reported, and we converted that into grams per day, assuming about a 12 ounce of beer, 4 ounce of wine, and 1.5 ounce of spirits as an equivalent of roughly 12 gram of alcohol equivalent. Heart failure was ascertained using electronic health record with the International Code classification code for disease. And for heart failure, we preserve left ventricular ejection fraction. We set it at 50, greater than 50. And if the ejection fraction was below 50, we say it was reduced to keep it very simple. We did not classify the mid-range type. And statistical analysis, we use a standard Cox regression controlling for demographic, lifestyle, medication, and comorbidity. So not going to bore you with those tables. Suffice to just say we have data on 368,000. The last column where you have total alcohol, you can see the mean age, mean BMI, not very different from the US population, close to 30s. And then that 80% white, 11% blacks. And we have data on AUD, stands for alcohol use disorder, and heavy drinkings. There's about 21,500 in that category. We also have never drinker and former drinker. Many studies don't have data on never drinkers. So here are the adjusted hazard ratio for total heart failure. And if you look at the crude incidence rates, the third column here, from never drinker on top, followed by former drinkers, less than 6 grams per day, that's about half a drink. 6 to 12, that's about 1 drink. 12 to 24, that's about 2 drinks per day. 24 to 36, 2 to 3, and more than 3, but less than 5. The last category would be heavy drinkers. You can see that the crude incidence rate dropped from 15 to about 10 in the category of 6 to 36. And beyond that, it goes up and goes even higher among heavy drinkers. And when we control for potential confounder in the final model, model 3, the last column, you can see that there was about 10 to 15% lower risk of heart failure comparing those veterans who consume 2 to 3 drinks per day to never drinkers. And if they were consuming half to only less than half a drink, there was about 10% lower risk of developing heart failure compared to never drinkers. And so we modelize a dose response on the x-axis, grams of alcohol per day from 0 to 70, and on the y-axis, the hazard ratio. So you can see that nadir, it's somewhere between 10 to 12 grams per day, which would be moderate consumption. And the risk goes higher when the intake increases. So it didn't matter when we separate the type of heart failure with preserve or with reduced ejection fraction of the left ventricle. You can see that the J shape persists. Green is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, and orange is heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, which is consistent with other findings. The beverage type, because it was impossible to find some people that drink only one type and no other type of beverage. We use a preference. So we say if your total alcohol, if at least 15% of your total alcohol is coming from one type, then we will say that you prefer that type. Like prefer beer means your total alcohol, it's at least 50% from beer. Those who prefer wine means your total alcohol, at least 50% of that comes from wine. And for those that do not, they don't have 50% of any type, we say they have no preference. They consume any type. So as you can see, the point estimate hazard ratio adjusted, they somewhere between zero point 0.9, around zero point 0.9, so close to 10% lower risk, irrespective of the type, whether they prefer beer, wine, or liquor, compared to never drinkers. In this analysis, we excluded heavy drinkers, and we restricted to those within uh, moderate range of alcohol intake. So this project has some limitation in that we have a single assessment of alcohol, but it's reasonable to assume that people keep their habit unless they're sick or they get diagnosed with severe condition. We don't have ejection fraction on everybody, so we have limited data for heart failure subtype, and we do not have detailed data on the pattern of consumption of alcohol. Like if you those drinking 36 grams per day, do you drink at one time? Do you drink with meal? Or do you drink more than two drinks within an hour, within 2 hours, referring to binge drinking? Um, we have we use electronic health data and could be subject to misclassification. And obviously, a large sample size data on subtype of heart failure, prospective design, and the ability to separate never drinker from former and abuser are some of the strengths of the study. So in conclusion of this part, we show that alcohol consumption show a J-shaped relation with heart failure and its subtype, and there were no difference across beverage preferences. So this paper is under review, hasn't been published yet. So a second example, we look at nut consumption and the risk of CHD and stroke. So I'm going to skip some of the methods that were described in the dietary assessment. We assess CHD, coronary heart disease, and stroke using ICD code from electronic health record. And potential confounder were collected at baseline, or if missing, using electronic health record to supplement what was missing. So I'm going to skip the stat analysis and go straight to the results. So here, the table 1, the frequency of nut consumption here, less than 1 per month, 1 to 3 per month, once a week, 2 to 4 per week, and 5 or more per week. So this is mean age around 65, again, 90% men, BMI around 30, about 86% white, and systolic blood pressure the last time around 131. So again, we talk about the breakdown, 85% white, 10% black, but it's noteworthy to underscore that the median intake of nuts is about 1 to 3 times per month. So about 50% of the veteran consume only 1 to 3 times per week of nuts. So it's important for translation. We'll look at Mediterranean diet or Pre-Med with the pattern in Europe compared to the US. It's going to be two different world. So after about 3 years of mean follow-up, there were 6,300 new cases of coronary heart disease, about 3,500 new cases of ischemic stroke. So there was an inverse relation between nut consumption and coronary heart disease, as you can see here, with about 20% lower risk in those consuming 5 plus per week compared to those that consume less than one per month. And when we stratify by sex, we have inverse relation in men where we have more data. And you can see among women, we have unstable estimate because of limited subject. And when stratified by age, below Medicare age, above Medicare age, there was no interaction. We saw the same pattern. Stratified by race, white, we have more data, only about 10% Black. We have similar trend, but the wider confidence interval indicating that we have sparse data. So what about strokes? Ischemic stroke mirror the results of coronary heart disease with inverse relation. And it was the same between younger and older veteran and it's consistent Black and white. Similar limitation as for the alcohol paper, it could be transferred to here. So in conclusion, consumption of 3 nuts in veteran was associated with a lower risk of CHD and ischemic stroke. And these should be confirmed with additional data, especially when we have a chance to repeat dietary assessment to evaluate change over time. So with the few minutes, I'm going to devote them to other selected findings that could be of interest to the audience. So we look at dietary sodium and potassium and risk of cardiovascular disease. This is sodium and potassium computed from the nutrient as a nutrient. So as expected, potassium consumption was associated with a lower risk of developing cardiovascular disease, as you can see in the orange graph. And whereby sodium, as expected, intake, the higher sodium, the higher the risk of developing CVD. And the ratio of sodium to potassium is expected in green show what we would expect. So this is reassuring that although we use 61 item food frequency questionnaire, the data are behaving the way we expect them to do. Here's a very dense study just showing, here I was highlighting in the middle rectangle trans fat. And you can see the point estimate confidence limit to the right of 1, suggesting a high risk of coronary heart disease with trans fat as expected, comparing the highest to the lowest quintile. So about dietary patterns, where we step away from single food item or nutrient. So plant-based diet index and mortality. The plant-based assign a larger score for plant foods and a lower score for animal food and junk food and soda. So within the plant-based diet, there's a healthy and unhealthy. So we did the three, the healthy in blue, the unhealthy in maroon, and the overall in orange. So if we start with overall in orange, what's the relation between plant-based diet and mortality among veterans? So you can see to the left panel among Black, it's the inverse relation in this line. And for a European white participant on the right panel, it's similar. So plant-based diet confer a lower risk of dying among veterans. And healthy plant diet in blue, the effect size is even bigger. In contrast, unhealthy plant-based diet, as expected, is associated with a high risk of dying in both Black and white. That's the purple, the maroon graph. So another dietary pattern, we look at DASH, dietary approach to stop hypertension score, which is a diet rich in fruits and vegetable, legume, low-fat dairy, poor in saturated fat in meat. So trying to validate our data, we relate DASH score with the risk of developing heart attack, MI here. And through this spline, you could see an inverse relation. So the higher this DASH score, meaning if you consume more fruits, veggie, low-fat dairy, whole grain, your risk of developing heart attack is lower by almost 40% lower compared to people with the poor uh, DASH score. So here we look at alcohol consumption and risk of cardiac infarction or heart attack, because this is well studied in the US and anywhere in the world, suggesting a J-shaped relation where a lower risk is observed in the moderate consumption, about 12 to 24 for men and up to 12 grams for women. So you can see men, women, male, female, black and white, the bottom quadrant. There's a J-shaped relation suggesting that moderate range, there's a lower risk of heart attack with moderate consumption. So in conclusion, MVP offers researchers worldwide the largest database for nutritional studies. Um, and we have nutritional data currently on about 400,000 veterans. And the data behave the way they're supposed to through the validation study that I show you. And current findings are supportive of beneficial role of healthy dietary patterns uh, with the risk of CVD. And in conjunction with what I show you with the statin utilization, even among people with CVD, this is a good tool for the practitioner to reinforce the message that beside the drug, the diet, proper diet, it's appropriate. Future project would examine the role of genetics, because we have GWAS um, on everybody. We have genetic data on every member of the MVP. We're going to examine the role of genetics on diet CVD relation, in particular gene by environment interaction with specific dietary pattern, such as DASH, plant-based diet on CVD. We just got merit funded to study G by E with the body weight in MVP. And we will in the future expand the Diet CVD Association to include the role of microbiome, multi-omics towards precision nutrition in the US veteran. We have data on DNA methylation, we have proteomic, metabolomic, and we collected stool sample for microbiome. So I'd like to acknowledge the funding from the Office of Research and Development, the grants CSP G02, MVP 00, and other merits. And more importantly, we're indebted to the MVP participant and staff. And this is our team and our collaborator at the School of Public Health, Dr. Walter Willett, Frank Hu, and Laura Sampson. And thank you for your attention. Be more than happy to take any questions you may have.
Perfect. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I'm sure it's you can't really hear the applause in the auditorium, but and maybe those who are online can throw an applause emoji or a yeah, exactly. Um, thank you so much for that talk. It was fascinating, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions. So please feel free to raise your hand in the room or online. Maybe someone in the room could help with the microphone because I can't really see. I'm happy to kick us off with a question. So again, this isn't really my area of research. So I admittedly was reading about this in the New York Times, but I was reading that many studies, recent studies, have questioned the protective effect of small amounts of alcohol because the group of never drinkers or former drinkers or whatever contains people with underlying health problems for, and that is why they don't drink. And so this was a methodological question that people were raising that then questioned this protective effect of small amounts of alcohol. So I'm curious if you have heard the same thing, or if you've thought about this, or if you were able to control for that in your work.
That's a great question, and we always have that argument because the hot topic of alcohol very political and sometimes has nothing to do with science. So here's a scientific approach. So forget about former drinker, forget about a heavy drinker. Take moderate consumer, people that report that they consume moderately. You can measure the HDL in the blood. And there are studies out there that look at the um, the dose among moderate drinkers. So and say, okay, um, if you drink moderately and the pattern, a healthy pattern, meaning you avoid binging. So if you're gonna drink 12 grams per day of alcohol, it's better to split it into smaller quantity because of the physiologic effect of alcohol on platelet. And that's how the you prevent your coronary event or your stroke, ischemic stroke. If it's too much, it could thin your blood and you may be at risk of getting a hemorrhagic stroke. So these type of study are in support of a physiologic role of moderate drinking and cardiovascular disease, so that the reference is not never drinker. These are moderate drinker that are utilizing a different pattern. And the paper Ken Mukamov led some where you can address this question of sick quitter or people, whatever reason, family history, decide not to consume that address your question. But obviously, this question can never be settled for sure without a phase 3 randomized control trial. We had one started, but because again, it's a hot button, it was shut down. I don't want to go back there, but hopefully one day somewhere somebody is going to do this because um, it's not like if you don't do research, people are not drinking. People decide to drink, whether you do research or not. And the question is, do you help the people that are doing anyway to clean up the habits in that you show the right way to do it because they're going to do it anyway, and the wrong way to do it, and point out, like for women, breast cancer, even among moderate drinker, it's real, so that they're informed. So I hope I answer your question.
Just fascinating. Yeah, okay. And we might ask you another question then about this bigger picture of funding research. But Alice, maybe over to you first. Go ahead.
You may be on mute, and we can't hear you, Alice.
She went off video. Maybe we can come back to her. So then can I ask then a sort of gentle, I know you said you don't want to go there about the canceled study because I find that it's just very interesting. Can I ask a sort of gentle paraphrasing of a question that was put in the chat by Park Wildy about um, research support for this kind of thing? I don't know if you want to comment on the politics of research right now. Up to you. I don't know if you can read his question if you'd like to say anything about that.
Well, there's nothing that I'm going to tell the audience that they don't know. So I think we're scientists and we follow science. We follow the data, and the data inform us of the next step. And one of the approach, conjecture or refutation, is that you start with one hypothesis, collect the data. Either the data are supportive of your hypothesis, or they're not. And if they're not, you go to alternative line. So, and we don't dismiss the critics. So if the critics say, okay, your results is because of A, B, C, now we say, okay, let's go back to redesign the study to address uh, those concerns. And is the answer still the same, or does the answer change? And I don't think, as a researcher, at least my opinion, politics and research, they don't mix well.
Thanks for that diplomatic answer. Very well said. Um, Great. So I can't see very well in the room. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to ask a question? And if not, Alice, feel free to chime in at any point. We can see that you are unmuted, but we don't hear you. Or you could type your question. And if not, Will, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so pending Alice's question, I'm an economist. I know very little about nutrition, but learned a lot about cardiovascular nutrition from Alice, and others. And I'm really curious about the study design question of what you can learn specifically because these are veterans. So the basic idea that you have this enormous geographic variation with, I would imagine, relatively similar healthcare services. If their primary healthcare is being provided through the VA, that would tell me that their background healthcare service is roughly similar. But then you've got a bunch of other things that are varying. So my question for you is basically in your sort of overall place of this in the universe of different cohorts, what is learned specifically from veterans? Are there interesting study design that you could share with us? We're struggling with the question of teaching students about and learning about study designs that shed light on particular parts, particular questions where you can have some kind of identification of a as if random exposure to something, and then the usual epidemiological controls and adjustments. And I'm just really curious about the idea that this population has very similar healthcare provision. And so there would be this similar background in that dimension, and maybe also military service conveys some similarities, but then there's this huge variance.
That's a great question. So, number one, even though they receive healthcare from the VA, some may decide to seek care outside the VA. Although, in particular, many years ago, but now things have improved with the backlog. I'm sure you read on the news front page what's happening with scheduling visit. So, and second, even though they're all veteran, there's a heterogeneity depending on where they live. So veterans that live in the urban area versus rural, access to care may still be a problem with transportation, what we call the C-box, the community-based outpatient clinic. These are smaller point of care that are not a medical center like the VA Jamaica Plain, where we have West Roxbury. It's equivalent, you would say, a tertiary healthcare center. So if you are Emory, Atlanta, where you have access to a major medical center versus a rural area where you have to travel 1 hour or 3 hours. So your provider may differ depending on where you're actually receiving care. So there's that heterogeneity, and that's a challenge we have to deal with. And number two, the beauty of that is because they tend to be very loyal to the system. So we have their medical record in the electronic system at our fingertips. So, and you can embed an observational study and mimic a trial within the system because the counterfactual is less of an issue because you know who they are, you know how long they've been there, and those are some of the advantages that a regular cohort, let's say Framingham or Eric or Cardia, will not give you. And we have the military exposure, and part of the expansion of MVP is to collect military exposure where they deploy. for how long, exposure to Agent Orange, burn pit, all kind of stuff. So you have all that information together, uh, in addition to genomic, other biomarker, and lifestyle. So social determinant of health is another one new aspect that is key priority for ORD. The earmarks some money to collect data on social determinant of health among veterans. So these are things that you have all these complex items in the system that is unique, that no other cohort can provide you with that, because you can analyze multi-omic with environmental, the phenomic things that you observe or they've been through many years of their life. So I would say this is a great asset for science that it's second to none, at least to my knowledge, in the world. We have the UK Biobank, they about half of what we have, and 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 our system, I would argue, it's better uh, and more complete than their system.
And interesting to compare with All of Us. The All of Us study is an other comparison.
The All of Us study, yes, it's broader. It has it's close to the general population. That's the advantage over the VA, where you have more male, mostly male, white, veteran or active duty. Because right now we're including active duty personnel to study epidemiology data on them and improve the quality of the health. But yes, you're correct. The All of Us, it has its pluses, and some of those that we cannot have in the VA. But the VA has its own unique asset that All of Us may not have in terms of generalizability. But if you're able to combine the two, or do a collaboration between the two studies, that would be fantastic for the research question. Yeah.
Fascinating. And for the benefit of those in the room, let me read off the question from Alice. Maybe we can just take this last question. She said she has connection problems, but her question is about the response rate for the FFQ, which is, I believe, the food frequency questionnaire. So do you think that by just getting responses from 1/3 of people, could some level of bias be introduced? And is there some way to assess that variable or that bias?
That's a good question. Number one, when you compare characteristics of those that completed the FFQ with the general VA population that we published way before MVP was even in inception, it's quite the same. Number two, it's by design, because the people that completed the questionnaire are usually the veteran that responded to the snail mail, where we put the questionnaire in the mail to them. The people that were enrolled online or that did not come to the clinic to sit down and fill out the questionnaire, they'll go online, log in, do the stuff, and have the tassel device, calculated blood, put in the mail, they're done. Because we have the genetic data, we have the basic data. So it's the design that prevents other people from filling the question. It's not like they had the opportunity, they had the questionnaire in front of them, and they decide not to answer so that you can calculate the actual response rate. So I would not call it a response rate, but to get the response rate, we would say, okay, of the, I don't know, 1,000 people that received the snail mail with the questionnaire, how many of those did not fill out the question? And the veteran, with the beauty of that, is they're so loyal, they're so excited about research that most of them I would say 75 to 80% will return the questionnaire completed, because that's why they're so dedicated. And the lower number in FFQ is due to the design, enrollment via the internet, especially with COVID, where clinic face-to-face where no, and we have to find a way. Hey, how do we get to 1 million without the snail mail? Second, the burden and the cost. The cost of mailing out the paperwork, mailing the second time, third time. At some point, the government say, well, that's probably enough. The major objective was to study genetic, military exposure, and other stuff. So food frequency questionnaire for somebody like me is a low-hanging fruit that we can just grab without additional cost that will break the bank. So OIG probably they're not going to be thrilled, say, well, could you spare another couple of million to collect data on the food frequency questionnaire? I said, no, because we already have genetic, we have all this stuff for the live in electronic health record. We know the disease diagnosis, we know the lab, the x-ray, and so forth. So at some point, the return will be diminishing based on the investment. And that's probably the answer I will get from the ORD. But good question.
Yeah, fascinating. I want to say thank you to everyone for being with us today. This was a fascinating seminar that touched on, research design, questionnaires, the theory behind all of this, really ambitious research, but then really concrete study outcomes. I think it was so impressive how you wove in the studies and the results throughout the talk. So thank you so much for being with us today. It was an excellent speaker series, and thank you for your time. And we look forward to seeing everyone else next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And I'd also like to point out next week, we are excited to announce our speakers will be in person. So that'll be the first time this semester. Very exciting. Looking forward to it, everyone.